Hello viewers, it's Josie. Welcome back to Eclectic Movie Reviews. And we are approaching the end of May. And this time last year, I did a video about about recommendations for movies for Mental Health Awareness Month, that had a mental health theme. And but I thought I was gonna do that this year, but I decided to change my mind and just do a little bit of a May miscellany, miscellaneous recommendations. Forgive the sound of the train as I am recording this. First film we are going to discuss is Baghdad Cafe from 1987, directed by Percy Adlon, German director. This is his first English language feature. So Jasmine, played by German actress Marianne Sagebrecht, is a tourist coming from Germany with her husband on a road trip. They're in the American Southwest, their car gets stranded, and the two have an argument. Jasmine leaves her husband on the spot. And it's actually a very funny scene. Jasmine enters a truck stop community, the main staple being the Baghdad Cafe. Kevin Thomas, in his review, says that the cinematography resembles old-fashioned Southwestern roadside postcards. And I think he's very much right. It's a beautiful, beautiful scenery. The Baghdad Cafe is run by a woman named Brenda, who has a lot on her plate. She has a son and a daughter. Her husband leaves her. Brenda's often irritated with the people at the cafe. Jasmine and Brenda are at odds at first, but they gradually warm up to each other. Jasmine befriends the people in the community. Brenda's son, named Salamo, is the cafe pianist. The daughter, Phyllis, of course, has boys on her mind. And Jasmine spends some time with Phyllis and Phyllis's boyfriend named Eric. There's a tattoo artist named Debbie. Jasmine also meets a friendly painter named Rudy Cox, played by Jack Palance, and romance sparks between them. All in all, she brings so much light to the community. What's great about Marianne Sagebrecht's performance is how she non-verbally carries multiple emotions, curiosity and joy about the community, as well as any harbored personal rage. Whether she smiles, frowns, or is neutral, her facial expressions are delightfully attention-grabbing. They are the hook of this movie. They are part of the hook of this movie. Ultimately, I think what the film teaches us is what, no matter where we come from, our hardships shape us with that wisdom, we can make the world a better place. It's a super sweet charmer of a film. This movie also had a diverse cast, a fabulous cast, before it was cool. Cool meaning before it was considered sort of a, I don't want to say requirement, but you know what I mean. Brenda is African American, and obviously her children too. The cafe counter cashier is Native American, and but it doesn't focus on that. It's just a really beautiful character study and ensemble piece, ensemble study, if you will. Baghdad Cafe is available to watch on Tubi, and there's a DVD. This would be really great. This would make a really great Kino or Criterion release. Next up is Spike Lee's Bamboozled from 2000. I'm actually going to talk about two films from Spike Lee, Bamboozled and then Crooklyn. So in Bamboozled, Pierre Delacroix, played by Damon Wayans, is a struggling TV writer and producer. He's a Harvard alum. Pierre is the only executive of color at the network. His boss is played by Michael Rappaport, let's just say that he appropriates black culture. He tries to talk white, and his wife is a woman of color. And the funny thing is that Michael Rappaport is actually married to a black woman in real life. One reviewer I listened to of Bamboozle stated that Damon Wayans and Michael Rappaport's characters are basically two sides of the same coin, in that one is black and tries to act white, and one is white and tries to act black. And it's interesting how this came out in 2000, and Spike Lee is poking fun at types of disingenuous performative white liberalism. And so Pierre has ideas for shows with black casts that do not focus on race, but the network doesn't believe that those have any selling power. That's kind of like how this was an influence on American Fiction, which came out this past December and January. When Jeffrey Wright, his character is a writer. He's a writer of color, but he doesn't want to write, quote unquote, black stories. He wants to just write human stories. He doesn't want to be pigeonholed. And so after being fed up with all these rejections, Pierre formulates a grotesque and inevitably controversial ploy. He proposes that the network puts on a minstrel show. Minstrel shows, for those of you who do not know, were a form of theatrical entertainment beginning in the 19th century to the early half of the 20th century. They performed variety sketches akin to vaudeville. And vaudeville originally was a good opportunity to showcase black actors, but then white people saw how talented they were and said, hey, this is cool. So they adopted it themselves and put on blackface. And their performances often depicted dim-witted buffoonery. And so now what's interesting, I was trying to do some research when discussing this film about this to make this a little bit more well-rounded of a write-up. And I was reading that the actual rooted origins of blackface are not actually known. And but I did read on the History Channel website, forgive me if that's not a refutable source, but they were saying that one of the earliest examples of blackface was Shakespeare performances of Othello. Now, the distinction with Pierre's minstrel show proposal is that strictly black actors will perform with blackface. There were when blackface was used with minstrel shows, there were some black actors. There were plenty of black actors who used blackface, but it was mainly white people were known for using it. But I don't want to get on too far of a tangent with that because I want to focus on this, and I don't want to make this video too long, longer than it probably will be. But anyway, so before putting on the show, there's a conversation in the boardroom regarding concerns about the show possibly offending people. Sounds kind of like today. And Man Ray and Womack, played by Savion Glover and Tommy Davidson, two street performers living in the poverty margins of society, are cast as the leads of Mantan, the new Millennium Minstrel Show. Man Ray gets the role of Mantan, and Mantan is inspired by vaudeville comedian Mantan Moreland, and Womack is Sleep and Eat, inspired by African-American comedian Willie Best, who also went by that name. And surprise, surprise, the show is a hit. So much so that fans of the show ending up doing blackface. And it turns out that the concerns about offending people were justified because a group of rappers called the Mau Mau's are infuriated with the stereotypical images presented on screen and they rise up and rebel violently. And Spike Lee is critiquing how the media pigeonholes people of colors into caricatures because it, quote unquote, sells better. And he's also suggesting that the stereotypes presented about the Black community throughout the history of media is in and of itself sort of is basically a form of blackface. And that's what makes this film so thought-provoking to this day. As I said, this was an influence on American fiction. Both films address the question why stories of color have to be pigeonholed. Stories of people of color have to be pigeonholed in particular boxes. And I think the most tragic thing about this film and most heartbreaking is the character of Man Ray. He's genuinely a super talented tap dancer. He doesn't want his natural talent and love for tap dancing to be exploited like this. And in a way, he's sort of the audience surrogate. And Savion Glover, who's an actual tap dancer choreographer, gives such a great performance in this. Probably gets my favorite performance in the film. So you can rent Bamboozled on Amazon for a few dollars, and it's on Blu-ray through Criterion. Let's move on to Spike Lee's Crooklyn from 1994, just celebrated its 30th anniversary, I believe, last week. So this is a semi-autobiographical account of Spike Lee's familial upbringing. It was written by Spike alongside his sister Joey, if I'm saying her name right, and Cinque, his brother. So if I'm pronouncing his name right, forgive me if I'm not. The narrative follows the Carmichaels. They're a family with 5 kids, 4 boys and 1 girl, as the title suggests, Brooklyn. The mother, Carolyn, is played wonderfully by Alfre Woodard. She's a teacher. The father, Woody, is played by Delroy Lindo. He's a jazz musician, well, aspiring. Carolyn is what you would call a tough, loving mother. She doesn't tolerate any nonsense. She works super hard to keep the family financially stable. She not only relies on her husband's assistance, but also that from her boys. I think Mr. and Mrs. Carmichael really do love each other, but because Carolyn wants the family to be as financially stable as possible, she believes that Woody must be realistic with his ambitions. And that's understandable on her behalf. But you do feel like sympathy for Woody as he struggles with his music career. And what's interesting about is that rather than this being told from the point of view of a Spike Lee stand-in, the narrative is heavily focused on Joey, the daughter. And of Spike Lee's films that I've seen, this is probably the least to do about race. It's more focused on being a slice of life story about a family trying to get by and a little girl's coming of age. And her arc is so relatable. And and this movie has a killer soundtrack featuring music by the Staple Sisters, the Chambers Brothers, Jimi Hendrix, Sly and the Family Stone. And there's one particular needle drop of "Ooh, Child" that makes me tear up. It's a really touching family drama. Crooklyn is not available to stream for free, but it is on DVD and Blu-ray. I rented the Kino Blu-ray from the library, and it's great. And Alfre Woodard is just incredible. She's such a great actress and doesn't get the recognition she deserves. So good. Anyway, here, I'm gonna have a sidebar. I've said for a long time that I'm in favor of more diverse casting, but what we need to see is more roles for and stories starring people of color, whether Native American, African American, Asian American, what have you, that Latino, that do not have to do with race. If white people can get roles that do not advertise the fact that they're Black, then the same can be done with whatever ethnicity you are. Baghdad Cafe is a great example of this, and Crooklyn, I'd say, fits into this mold as well. Next up is, I'm going to talk about, and this is another film that can be is another example of this. while it touches on history of this group, it's more focused on being a family story, and that is Daughters of the Dust from 1991, written and directed by Julie Dash. And across South Carolina and Georgia are a group of sea islands, and many of the African Americans preserved their indigenous cultural roots when they were brought here to the States as slaves. And the islanders in this film maintain the traditions of their Yoruba ancestors. And the narrative of Daughters of the Dust is set in 1902 on Tataw Island, aka St. Simon's Island, centering on the peasant family. And this was a decade prior to the Great Migration, a time when African Americans migrated from the south to the north. The islanders are on the brink of migrating. And so before I get to the characters of the film, I'm going to read a little bit from an article, Daughters of the Dust, the History of Gullah Communities, from, I believe it's Reading History Magazine. Okay, so white slaveholders obviously tried to obliterate the cultural traditions of people captured from West Africa, because through knowledge comes power and strength. In the Black-dominated low country areas, this proved simply impossible. So here, people with different ethnic and tribal heritage, for example, the Mandinka, Yoruba, Fon, and Igbo, created a new and distinctive Creole culture that drew upon elements of a diverse Western past, and to a lesser extent, the Euro-American cultural forms they encountered in the New World. Gullah is also influenced by the Caribbean world, since many captured Africans crossing the Atlantic spent time in the Caribbean islands before eventually arriving in America. In the Carolina and Georgia Low Country, this new culture became known as Gullah. Enslaved people became Gullah slaves. Their patois or dialect became the Gullah language, and their region, now dominated by Route 17, became known as the Gullah area, though some people in the Georgia Sea Islands became known as the Geechee, hence the hybrid term Gullah Geechee culture. The etymology of the term Gullah, its origins, are debated. It might be a derivation of the Gullahs, people of West Africa, or a shortened form of Angola, from where many of the South Carolina slaves were imported. But for me, what is important is that Gullah was new and unique in the U.S. So let's move on to more about Daughters of the Dust. So Nana, Coralie Day, the matriarch of the peasants, is very tied to the old ways, and she doesn't want to leave the island. She wants the islanders to remember their roots as they travel to new destinations. The story mainly goes into Nana's granddaughters. Hagar is leading the way of the islanders' migration journey. She believes that Nana's spiritual worldviews are outdated and obsolete, and that moving northwards would allow for more educational and vocational chances to thrive. There are some generational gaps, a lot, I should say. Hagar has a daughter named Iona, who has a romance with a Cherokee Islander named St. Julian Lastchild. Barbara O., also known as Yellow Mary, is visiting the island from the urban side with her female lover Trula, wanting to spend some time with family prior to the migration. Nana's grandson Eli is indecisive about migrating northwards or continuing to live on Tataw/St. Simon's. His wife Eula was raped. She's pregnant, but she's unsure as to whether or not the child is her husband's. Interestingly, forgive me for the train, the film was narrated by Eli and Eula's future child. There is devout Christian Viola visiting from Philadelphia. She befriends a photographer named Mr. Sneed. And so yeah, Daughters of the Dust is one of my favorite first-time watches of the year. The acting ensemble is fantastic. I learned so much watching this movie about a time in history that is not discussed much in schools. It was really interesting learning about West African spiritualism that carried over to the United States. The story also goes into hoodoo. Cinematography is gorgeously transportive. There's such a vast liveliness to the way the camera captures the trees and sand of the island. Most of all, it's a beautifully moving and touching story about family and womanhood. And Daughters of the Dust is available to stream for free on Tubi, and it's on DVD and Blu-ray. I got a DVD from the library. For the libraries around me didn't carry Blu-ray, but that's okay. Seriously, this could use another upgrade though, because it's a piece of history. Next up, we're going back to 1935 to The Good Fairy, directed by William Wyler, the screenplay by Preston Sturges, based on a play by Hungarian-born playwright Ferenc Molnar. At a cloistered orphanage, an orphan named Louisa Gingelbuscher, played by Margaret Sullivan, really fantastic performance, has a hobby of telling fairy stories. The orphanage head recruits Louisa out into the outside world, teaching her to be kind to human beings on a daily basis, particularly men, since they are the ones dominating. Louisa is employed as a movie theater usherette in Budapest. Louisa, being a lover of fairy tales, decides to act as a good fairy, granting people wishes. It's obviously an act, but there's this ironic sincerity to it because of Louisa's genuine passion for fairy tales and her desire to connect with the world. She has an adorable naivete akin to Bella Baxter in Poor Things. And Louisa meets a waiter named Detlef, played by Reginald Owen, who acts as her new paternal protector upon leaving the orphanage. Detlef brings Louisa to a super fancy upscale party where she meets Conrad, played by Frank Morgan, a corrupt man in the meatpacking business. Conrad becomes infatuated with Louisa wanting to marry her, much to Detlef's dismay, given what a lecherous individual Conrad is. This reminded me of he kind of reminded me of Mark Ruffalo's character in Poor Things to an extent. And then in marrying Louisa, Conrad hopes to shower Louisa with gifts. Being the charitably inclined woman that she is, Louisa comes up with a plan. She lies to Conrad that she's already a married woman. She browses through the phone book to choose a husband, and she picks Dr. Max Sporum, played by Herbert Marshall, a lawyer experiencing financial difficulty. She hopes that with the gifts he showers her with, she can charitably donate them to her poor fake husband. Prior to meeting Max Sporum, Conrad actually gives him a job, not knowing about Louisa's secret scheme. This being a screwball comedy, Max and Louisa end up falling in love, creating more comedic zaniness and mischief in the plot. This screwball is an adorably delightful hidden gem. I would say that it was also quite progressive, ahead of its time for having a female protagonist, with so much agency, particularly with her drive to contribute positively to society. What an inspiring role model, you know? The Good Fairy is not available to stream anywhere, but there is a Kino Blu-ray. See if the DVD or Blu-ray is at your library. Otherwise, as I always say, get an interloan. Next up, we're going to talk about another screwball of sorts. Speaking of Preston Sturges, it's Preston Sturges inspired. The Hudsucker Proxy from 1994, directed by the Coen brothers. Last year, we saw quite a few movies about inventors and the inventions of products, including Oppenheimer, Air, and The Beanie Bubble, which I did not see, and I don't plan to. This is a fictional biopic with fictional characters about a hula hoop inventor told in the style of a Preston Sturges screwball comedy. The tagline of the film is actually a comedy of invention. At Hudsucker Industries, the old long-term head Warring Hudsucker takes his own life. Consequently, the board of directors leader, Sidney Musburger, played by Paul Newman, greedily devises a scheme in which the company will hire a total idiot as the new company head. Reason being, if the stocks drop to the lowest rate possible, Sidney and his business buddies can purchase the company and manage it for themselves. And the man they select for the position, is an aloof rookie mailroom worker named Norville Barnes, played by Tim Robbins. This role is very different from other roles I've seen him in because he's more of a wacky goofball rather than like a serious type. And the character brings all of that energy into his leadership. The rise of the naive Norville Barnes can be connected to the rise of Peter Sellers' character in the Hal Ashby film Being There. Norville Barnes' hula hoop invention is a big success, bringing more value to the company against Sidney Musburger's wishes. A news reporter named Amy Archer, played by Jennifer Jason Leigh, enters the picture, intending to uncover the suspicious business actions of Musburger. Norville and Amy end up falling for each other, and this movie's a delight. It wasn't particularly successful when it came out, neither critically nor commercially, but it's gotten a reassessment over the years. It's certainly deserving of it. It is on DVD and Blu-ray, and it's on Canopy. But yeah, I love the Hudsucker Proxy. Definitely check it out if you haven't already. Next, I'm going to talk about Platform from 2000, written and directed by Jia Zhangqi, how you pronounce his name, Chinese director. Jia Zhangqi has a film at the Cannes competition this year called Caught by the Tides. And because of that, I decided to watch some of his earlier films. So the narrative of Platform follows a traveling theater company at a time where communism was on the decline and capitalism and pop culture was on the rise. So the Cultural Revolution. It spans from 1979 through the 1980s. The acts the troupe puts on are approved by the state. We're given an intimate look at four performers, Kui, Yin, Zhang, and Zong. Zhang and Zong are in a complicated relationship. Zhang accidentally impregnates Zong, so she has to get an abortion. And it's clear that there's sparks between Kui and Yin, but Yin's father, being a military officer, does not approve. They have sort of a will they, won't they relationship throughout the movie, and the theater troupe transitions to privatization, and they must seek new managerial oversight. Kui is sad about this, but he's willing to travel with the group to find the new oversight manager. Kui, Zhang, and Zong embark on the road while Yin stays. They enter a rural community where some of Kui's family resides. His cousin's there, and the cinematography of the rural Chinese countryside is beautifully captivating. Kui yearns for Yin, and Jia Zhangqi examines how the transition of a country affects the personal spheres of young people transitioning into adulthood. And it's a really beautiful movie. And it's a really great examination of history of some of Chinese history and of industrialization, and which he examines in his other films, like Still Life from 2006, and his new movie Caught by the Tides, I heard, also does that. So Platform is not available to stream anywhere, but it's available on DVD. Try to get it from your library. This really would make a great Criterion release. Next up, this write-up is not going to be too long. I'm going to talk about Quiet City from director Aaron Katz. Jamie and Charlie meet on the subway, and they immediately form a connection and spend the next 24 hours together in kind of like the before sunrise. And this is part of the trend of mumblecore films, but what makes this stand out from other films in that realm is that it's not trying too hard to be mundane or realistic. It's more concerned about depicting the sweet relationship and the city adventure between our protagonists. And Brian Sauer calls this movie adorable core, and I definitely agree. I don't really have much else to say about it other than that it's really, really sweet. Check it out. And it's a big recommendation. It's not available to stream, but I rented a DVD so that's Quiet City. Next up is Albert Brooks's Real Life from 1979. So, in this mockumentary, Albert Brooks, playing a fictionally exaggerated, most narcissistic version of himself, has a goal of making a super realistic documentary about American familial life in the vein of a PBS show, An American Family. He convinces the Yeagers, a family in Phoenix, Arizona, to allow him to document their daily lives. Warren and Jeanette, the dad and mom, are played by Charles Grodin and Frances Lee McCain. Let's just say that Albert Brooks' documentation methods are intrusive and anxiety-inducing. He goes too far, putting the family in ridiculous situations that it's almost scary. Charles Grodin's character is a vet, and Brooks and the film crew film a day in the life of his profession. Charles Grodin's character gets so nervous that he accidentally administers the anesthesia twice, thereby killing a horse he's performing surgery on. In another scene, he joins the wife Jeanette at a gynecologist appointment. That's really awkward. Things get even more ridiculous. While watching real life, I actually thought a little bit about May December in terms of how you question the integrity and intentions of the main characters. In that film, Natalie Portman's character says she wants to consult with and observe the family and portray them on screen in order to get a deeper understanding of when it's actually about ego. Likewise, Albert Brooks cares less about getting an understanding of and compassion for the Yeager family than he does about creating a cinematic vision. It's amazing how this film predated reality TV shows, which would become part of the zeitgeist, damaging the minds of several people. Brooke also satirizes the desires of certain filmmakers or of trying to make as authentic and realistic films as possible. Again, there's a questioning of the integrity of that and whether that is truly an authentic intention or if it's to serve the ego. Real Life is available to rent on Amazon Prime for a few dollars. See if you could get it from a DVD from your library. Criterion has a couple of Albert Brooks films on Blu-ray, including Lost in America, Modern Romance, and Defending Your Life. And then they are adding this to the mix in August. Albert Brooks' Real Life is a landmark of satire. It's one of the funniest movies about movie making, for sure. And then second to last is A Simple Plan from 1998, directed by Sam Raimi. Hank and Sarah Mitchell are a married couple residing in Wright County, a rural area of Minnesota. He's a feed mill bookkeeper and she works at a library. The two are expecting a child. Hank has an older brother named Jacob, played by Billy Bob Thornton. He struggles with some intellectual challenges. One day, Hank, Jacob, and a friend of theirs, Lou Chambers, played by character actor Brent Briscoe, come across an airplane that crashed. Inside the plane, other than a dead pilot, is a bag of $4.4 million in cash. Hank initially proposes to turn in the money. Jacob and Lou insist on not to follow through with that plan. They decide to hold the money in their house until after the winter season in hopes that if there is no word about the cash missing, they could use it for themselves. It's interesting how the characters are presented with the ideal scenario that everyone would love, money literally falling from the sky at their feet. However, this is also the inciting incident leading to the character's ego and fear-based decision-making that seems valuable in the short term, but inevitably leading to damage. This is a riveting and quite human exploration of how greed can get the worst of people. And these aren't bad people. In fact, they're pretty relatable, ordinary blue-collar individuals. The story examines why good people make destructive decisions out of the fear of lack. At the heart of the film is the relationship between the brothers Hank and Jacob. Both Bill Paxton and Billy Bob Thornton give incredible performances, some of their best acting. This was nominated for 2 Oscars in the 1998-1999 Oscar cycle. Best Supporting Actor Billy Bob Thornton and Best Adapted Screenplay they were Oscar nominated for. The screenwriter Scott Smith adapted his own novel of the same title. The story is somewhat inspired by The Partner's Tale from Geoffrey Chaucer's Canterbury Tales. The technical elements of this film are also pretty astounding. The tone of the cinematography fits perfectly with the winter setting. The editing is also fantastic. This movie is paced so intricately, and that also speaks to the screenplay. The pacing is great. It moves. It was co-edited by Arthur Coburn, who edited some of Sam Raimi's other films, including The Gift and Spider-Man. He also edited Beverly Hills Cop and The Mask. A simple plan is available to rent for a few dollars, so you can't stream it for free. There is a DVD. I don't know about its Blu-ray availability, but another label should really put this out. And lastly, sticking on the note of families and greed, let's talk about The Song of Sparrows from 2008, directed by Majid Majidi, Iranian filmmaker. The narrative centers on an ostrich ranch farmer named Kareem, played by Reza Naji, gives a excellent performance. He and his wife Nargiz have 3 children. The older daughter Haniye, I believe that's her name, is hearing impaired, and her hearing aid gets lost, so it needs replacement because she has school exams coming up. Kareem goes searching for it. Kareem's son Hussein and his friends find the hearing aid, but it's not fully functional. Getting a free hearing aid repair would take up to 4 months, and that timing does not coincide well with Haniye's exams. When Kareem gets new ostriches for his farm, one of them escapes. Not long after, he decides to travel to the urban side to repair Haniye's hearing aid. When he does, Kareem is mistaken for a taxi driver, and he gets a gig of transporting individuals and goods/products. At his heart, Kareem truly is a generous man with a kind integrity. However, motivated by his fear of lack, Kareem becomes greedy with this profession. Nargis and the children are not happy about this direction that Kareem is going in. Because of his actions, Kareem is put in a situation where he must reevaluate his intentions and prioritize the well-being of himself and his family. By well-being, I mean like his health. And what we get here is an extremely empathetic social realist portrait of a working class family. There's cool contrasting cinematography here with the city being tighter and more claustrophobic, while the farm area is a little bit more expansive, but still not like gigantic. It's a bit more personable, if that makes sense, because the family theme, like, get more intimate interactions. It's almost like a Frank Capra film set in Iran with a biting edge by not being afraid to show a man at both his best and worst. It's a universal narrative. It's one of those films that remind you to be grateful for what you have in life. The Song of Sparrows is available to watch on YouTube, and it is on DVD. I would love to see some of Majid Majidi's films get released on Criterion. So that will do it for this installment of Eclectic Movie Reviews. Thank you for watching. Goodbye for now. Have a great Memorial Day weekend, everybody.